There is a specific person who built Las Vegas. Not the architects, and not the mobsters, and not the corporate executives whose names appear on the annual reports, and not the hedge fund managers whose carried interest depends on the quarterly earnings call. A specific, ordinary, unremarkable person who is not famous and was never intended to be famous, and whose contribution to the construction of the most successful entertainment destination in the history of American leisure culture was so quiet and so consistent, and so entirely taken for granted that the industry that depended on them did not notice they were gone until the floors started emptying, and the visitor numbers started falling, and the mayor started going on television to beg Canadians to come back. The person who built Las Vegas was the middle-class American gambler, the school teacher from Cleveland who saved for 6 months to take a long weekend in February and came back every February for 30 years, the auto worker from Detroit who flew in with $400 in his pocket and a genuine excitement about sitting at a blackjack table and playing a fair game against a house that acknowledged his presence with a comp dinner and a room rate that felt like a gift. The retired postal worker from Phoenix who drove up on a Tuesday because the drive was easy and the midweek rate was $60 and the slot machines paid well enough for the entertainment budget to last through Thursday. The couple from Kansas City who had their 20th anniversary at the Flamingo because the Flamingo meant something, because it had the glamour and the history and the sense of occasion that a 20th anniversary deserved, and because they could actually afford it, not easily, not without planning, but actually, genuinely, without debt or sacrifice that damaged the rest of the year. These people were not high rollers, they were not whales. They were not the 10% of players who generate 40% of the revenue and who the VIP host meets at the plane. They were the 90%. The ones who showed up reliably, who spread the word faithfully, who brought their children back as adults and their grandchildren back as families, who made Las Vegas not just a casino resort but a cultural institution, a shared American experience, a place that had meaning beyond its function because enough ordinary people had given it enough of their ordinary lives that it had accumulated the weight of something real. Las Vegas priced them out. Every single one of them, systematically, deliberately, and with full knowledge of exactly what it was doing. And the floors are empty, and the restaurants are half full, and the visitor numbers are falling, and the mayor is on television begging because the people who built this city were shown the door by the people who inherited it. The price out did not happen all at once. If it had happened all at once, if MGM Resorts had announced on a single Tuesday morning that it was raising every price by 40% and eliminating every comp program and charging for parking and installing automated drink sensors simultaneously, the response would have been immediate and organized and impossible to ignore. The industry understood this. The price out happened incrementally, one small decision at a time, across a period of approximately 15 years. Each individual change too small to trigger the organized response that would have forced a reversal, but accumulating across that 15-year period into a total transformation of the economics of a Las Vegas visit that made the city inaccessible to the demographic that had sustained it. The parking fee was $2 when it was introduced, then $5, then $10, then $15, then $25. At each increment, most of the people paying it absorbed it as an annoyance rather than an outrage, because the increment from the previous level was small enough to seem like a rounding error. By the time the parking fee reached $30, the person who had been absorbing each increment had already accepted the premise that parking in Las Vegas costs money. They could no longer clearly remember when it did not cost money. The baseline had moved, and the memory of the previous baseline had faded, and the $30 parking fee felt like the natural state of things rather than the endpoint of a 15-year escalation strategy. This is the specific psychological mechanism that the price out relied on, and it is a mechanism that the casino industry understood long before it deployed it, because the casino industry has been in the business of managing human perception for longer than any other industry in America. The people who designed the slot machine understood that the player could not accurately assess their rate of loss in real time, and they designed the machine to exploit that perceptual limitation. The people who eliminated the clocks and windows understood that the player's perception of time was a variable that could be manipulated to extend the session. The people who introduced the incremental price increases understood that the player's memory of previous price levels was imperfect, and that imperfect memory could be exploited to make a 40% cumulative price increase feel like a series of minor adjustments to a fundamentally reasonable situation. The casino industry is the most sophisticated applied psychology operation in the history of American commerce. It did not accidentally stumble into the incremental price out strategy. It deployed it with the same deliberation it has deployed every other behavioral influence mechanism for the last 60 years. The budget traveler was the first category of the founding demographic to be fully priced out, and the mechanism of their exclusion was the resort fee. Before the resort fee, a budget traveler could genuinely find value on the Las Vegas Strip. The competition between properties for the occupied room meant that the real cost of a hotel night was frequently subsidized to the point where a midweek room at a mid-tier strip property was available for $40 or $50. A price that reflected the casino's calculation that the occupied room generated enough ancillary revenue from the gamblers staying in it to justify the discount. The casino was treating the room as a marketing expense. The room got the player through the door and onto the floor, and the floor generated the margin. That calculation was rational, and it produced a pricing structure that was genuinely accessible to the American middle class. A family that could budget $300 for 2 nights in Las Vegas could actually do it. They could fly in, stay on the strip, eat at the buffet, gamble with whatever was left, and have a Las Vegas experience that corresponded to the cultural promise of Las Vegas without destroying their household finances. That family exists in the marketing materials and the popular culture and the collective memory of Las Vegas. That family cannot come to the Strip anymore. The room that was $50 is now listed at $50 and revealed to cost $115 at checkout when the resort fee and the parking fee appear on the folio. The family that budgeted $300 for 2 nights finds that the accommodation alone now costs $230 before they eat a single meal or place a single bet. The trip does not work at that budget. The family does not come, and another generation of Las Vegas customers is lost before the relationship has a chance to form. The working class gambler, the person who came to Las Vegas specifically for the gambling rather than for the spectacle and the shows and the celebrity restaurants, was priced out by the game rule changes that the previous videos in this series have documented in detail. The 3-2 blackjack table was not just a better deal than the 6-5 blackjack table in a financial sense. It was a different relationship between the casino and the player. The 3-2 table said the casino was willing to offer you a game where the house edge was small enough that your skill and discipline and knowledge of basic strategy could make a meaningful difference to your outcome. The casino was respecting your intelligence and your preparation. It was acknowledging that you had done the work of understanding the game and that it was willing to compete with you on terms that gave your preparation some purchase on the result. The 6-5 table does not say that. The 6-5 table says the casino has decided that the revenue per table per hour is more important than the fairness of the game. It says the house edge has been expanded specifically to capture more from the player who does not know the difference, which is the tourist, and the player who knows the difference, which is the working class gambler who has been playing blackjack for 20 years, is expected to absorb the change anyway because what is he going to do? Leave. He did leave. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But over years of trips on which the game got incrementally worse, and the comps got incrementally smaller, and the minimum got incrementally higher, and the value of the experience kept contracting, he stopped coming back. He found better games at the locals' casinos in the valley and better odds in the other markets this series has covered. He voted with his bankroll, which is the only vote that was available to him, and the blackjack floor felt the loss, even if the quarterly earnings call attributed it to macroeconomic headwinds, rather than to the specific, deliberate decision to triple the house edge and insult the knowledge of a player who had been bringing his action to the Strip for 15 years. The retiree demographic, which had been one of the most reliable and most consistent components of the Las Vegas visitor base for decades, was priced out by the combination of the comp program deterioration and the minimum bet escalation that happened simultaneously across the Strip's major properties. The retired schoolteacher who came to Las Vegas 4 times a year with a modest gambling budget managed that budget carefully, understood the games she played, used the comp system to stretch her entertainment dollar, and expected that the relationship she had built with her casino over years of loyalty would be honored in the form of the occasional free room, the regular free play offer, the quarterly celebration dinner. These expectations were not unreasonable. They were based on a program that the casino had designed and marketed and used to build her loyalty over the course of years. The program was real when she built her loyalty around it. It was gutted while she was still loyal. The free room that had required 1 level of theoretical loss to earn now required twice that level. The quarterly free play offer that had been reliable became sporadic. The anniversary dinner that had been complimentary began arriving as a discounted offer with a minimum spend attached. She did not stop being loyal. The program stopped honoring it, and when she finally ran the numbers, as retirees on fixed incomes eventually must run every number, she discovered that the value she was receiving from the relationship had declined below the value she was delivering to it. The equilibrium was gone. The program was taking more than it was giving. And a woman who had been a loyal, reliable, repeat visitor for 20 years made a quiet, undramatic decision that her loyalty belonged somewhere that still earned it. She started driving to a locals casino on the edge of the valley where the comps were real and the minimums were $5, and the host called her by her first name, and the relationship still worked the way the relationship was supposed to work. The young adult gambler, the 25 to 35-year-old who represents the generation that the Las Vegas Strip desperately needs to cultivate to replace the aging demographic it is losing, was priced out before the relationship even started. The millennial and the younger Gen Z visitor who arrived in Las Vegas for the first time in the last 5 years encountered a city that had already decided their primary value was as a vehicle for spectacle consumption rather than gambling. The Strip had repositioned itself around clubs and concerts and celebrity restaurants and Formula One and sports betting apps and all of the other high-margin, low-repeat entertainment products that generate excellent quarterly revenue and terrible long-term customer relationships. The young visitor was invited to spend $300 at a day club and take a photo in front of a fountain and fly home. They were not invited to sit down at a fair blackjack game and learn to love the rhythm of the cards and develop the specific, deep, particular relationship with Las Vegas that the generations before them had developed by being treated as gamblers rather than as Instagram content. The casino was not trying to create a lifelong customer in the young visitor. It was trying to maximize the revenue of the current visit from a demographic that was assumed not to be a gambling demographic. The assumption was self-fulfilling. The young visitors who were not welcomed as gamblers did not become gamblers. They became former Las Vegas visitors who went twice and found it expensive and superficial and decided they preferred New Orleans or Nashville or wherever else their entertainment dollar would be treated as something worth competing for, rather than simply extracting. The convention attendee, who is a specific and economically significant component of the Las Vegas visitor base that is frequently overlooked in the cultural conversation about the city's decline, was priced out by the hotel rate inflation that the convention calendar enables and the resort fee structure amplifies. Las Vegas's convention economy is the largest in the country, hosting events like the Consumer Electronics Show, the National Association of Broadcasters Convention, and hundreds of industry trade shows that bring hundreds of thousands of business travelers to the city every year. These travelers are not leisure visitors. They are professionals whose travel is paid by their employers, whose hotel rates are booked through corporate travel programs, whose meal expenses are reimbursable, and who are therefore, in theory, less price-sensitive than leisure visitors. In theory. In practice, the corporate travel programs that govern most convention travelers' hotel bookings have rate caps. They have per diem limits. They have policies that prevent booking rooms above a certain nightly rate regardless of what the property charges. When Las Vegas hotel rates during convention periods reach $800 or $1,000 a night for rooms that rent for $200 on slow weekdays, The corporate travel program cannot authorize the booking, and the convention attendee stays in a property outside the Strip corridor or in a less desirable location, and their ancillary spending, the meals and the gambling and the entertainment that represents the real economic value of a convention visitor beyond the room rate, does not go to the Strip property that priced them out. The convention economy, which should be one of the most reliable and most recession-resistant components of the Las Vegas revenue base, is being cannibalizing by the same rate maximization strategy that has damaged every other relationship the Strip has with its customers. The international visitor, and specifically the Canadian visitor, who is the most geographically proximate and historically most reliable international market for Las Vegas tourism, was priced out by the accumulated weight of every insult documented in this series, amplified by the currency exchange reality of paying American resort fees and parking fees and 6 to 5 blackjack and $20 beers in a currency that is not their own. A Canadian visitor paying $30 for Strip parking is paying approximately 41 Canadian dollars for Strip parking. The resort fee that costs 45 American dollars costs approximately 62 Canadian dollars. The $6 coffee that the Las Vegas convenience store charges costs approximately 8 Canadian dollars. The premium that Las Vegas charges for every component of the visitor experience, which is already substantial in US dollar terms, is amplified by the exchange rate into something genuinely painful for the Canadian family that crosses the border on a leisure budget denominated in a currency that buys less. The political dimension of the 2025 tourism decline added a reason to stay home for Canadians who were already finding reasons in the math, but the math was already there. The political moment did not create the Canadian reluctance, it released it. The Canadian visitor, who had been absorbing the price increases and the fee escalations and the game rule degradations for years, was already carrying the weight of a relationship that no longer felt fair, and the political rupture gave them permission to act on the calculation they had already made. They were not turned away by politics. They were released from loyalty by a city that had already spent years telling them, in the language of resort fees and parking charges and gutted comp programs, that their loyalty was not something the city felt obligated to reciprocate. The specific economic consequence of pricing out the founding demographic is not visible in any single quarterly earnings report because the quarterly earnings report measures what happened to revenue in the current period and does not measure what is happening to the long-term relationship between the institution and its customer base. A casino can price out its founding demographic and still show acceptable revenue for several years because the demographic replacement of repeat middle-class visitors with first-time high-spending tourists maintains the revenue line even as the underlying customer relationship deteriorates. The tourist who visits once and spends lavishly generates revenue in the quarter they visit. The repeat visitor who visits 4 times a year and spends modestly generates less revenue per visit but generates it reliably, predictably, and at a customer acquisition cost of essentially zero because they were acquired years ago and are returning on the strength of a relationship rather than on the strength of a marketing campaign. When you replace the repeat visitor with the first-time tourist, you are substituting reliable, low-cost revenue for unreliable, high-cost revenue, and the substitution looks good on a quarterly earnings call right up until the moment the first-time tourist market saturates. The word of mouth from disappointed visitors starts to suppress demand. The marketing cost per acquired visitor starts to climb, and the visitor numbers start to fall. That is the precise moment Las Vegas is in right now. The substitution has run its course. The first-time tourist market has been saturated and degraded by the same extraction mechanisms that drove out the repeat visitor. The marketing budget is climbing to compensate for the declining word of mouth. And the visitor numbers are falling because there is no remaining customer segment that has not yet been shown why the price of the experience does not correspond to the value of the experience. The people who built Las Vegas are watching from Reno and Biloxi and Laughlin and the locals' casinos on the edge of the valley where the $5 blackjack table is still running and the host still knows their name. They did not go away. They did not stop gambling. They did not decide that the entertainment value of casino gaming was insufficient to justify the time and the money. They decided that the specific institution that had taken their loyalty for granted for 15 years and reduced the value of every component of the relationship, while raising the price of every component of the transaction, was not the institution that deserved what was left of their discretionary spending. They made a rational decision in response to rational information. The casino priced them out. They found somewhere else to go. And the floors are empty. The restaurants are half full on Saturday nights. The air traffic has fallen for 10 consecutive months. The visitor numbers are down 7.5% and falling. The mayor is on television asking Canadians to please come back. The people who built Las Vegas are not coming back. Not to the Strip. Not until the Strip offers them something worth coming back for. Something that corresponds to the promise that built the relationship in the first place. Something that acknowledges that their loyalty was real, and that real loyalty deserves a real reciprocal commitment rather than a resort fee, and a 6 to 5 blackjack payout, and an automated censor to decide whether they have earned their drink. The handshake that built this city was real. The value exchange that sustained it for 60 years was genuine. The middle-class gambler who made Vegas famous gave the city everything it needed to become what it became, and the city thanked them by deciding they were too expensive to retain. That decision has a cost. The cost is being measured right now in falling visitor numbers and empty floors and quarterly earnings calls where the executives are explaining to analysts why the headwinds are temporary and the fundamentals are sound. The fundamentals are not sound. The people who built it are gone. You cannot build an empire on the tourists who replace them. You can only wait for the tourists to discover what the regulars already know. The city that was famous is not the city that exists, and the city that exists is not worth what it charges to visit. The founding demographic did the math. The math said leave. They left. The Strip is learning, slowly and expensively, that the people it priced out were not a cost. They were the product.